Across the world, there are ancient structures that should not exist. Massive pyramids built thousands of years ago. Stone circles aligned with the movement of the sky. Some of these monuments are older than the pyramids of Egypt. Others were built by civilizations that disappeared long before written history began. In this video, we're going to explore some of the most incredible ancient sites ever discovered. From mysterious passage tombs in Ireland to massive earthworks in North America and hidden Inca cities deep in the Andes. But before we begin, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. Now, let's begin. Maiden Castle. In the green countryside of southern England, just outside the historic town of Dorchester, a vast shape rises gently from the landscape. From a distance it appears to be nothing more than a large grassy hill, its slopes softened by centuries of wind, rain, and grazing animals. But when seen from above, the true scale of the place becomes clear. Lines of earth stretch across the hill in enormous curves. Deep ditches cut into the ground. High banks of soil rise in layered rings around the summit. This is Maiden Castle. Despite its name, it is not a castle in the medieval sense. There are no towers, no stone keeps, no knights or royal banners. Instead, Maiden Castle is one of the largest Iron Age hill forts ever built in Europe. A massive fortified settlement created more than 2,000 years ago by communities living long before the arrival of the Romans in Britain. The hill itself had already been used by people for thousands of years before the great fortifications appeared. Archaeological evidence suggests that small farming communities lived in the area as early as the Neolithic period, around 5,000 years ago. These early inhabitants left behind traces of simple structures, burial mounds, and agricultural activity across the surrounding countryside. But the transformation of the hill into the immense fortress we see today began much later, during the Iron Age, around the 6th century BCE. At that time, communities across Britain were building hill forts on elevated ground as places of protection, trade, and social gathering. Maiden Castle quickly became one of the most ambitious of these settlements. The builders reshaped the natural hill into a formidable defensive stronghold. Enormous ditches were dug around the perimeter of the hill, and the soil removed from these trenches was piled up to create towering ramparts. Over time, the defenses grew more complex. Instead of a single wall, multiple layers of earthworks were constructed, forming a series of massive defensive rings that surrounded the hilltop. Approaching the fort would not have been easy. An enemy attempting to reach the interior would have had to climb steep slopes, cross deep ditches, and pass through narrow entrances carefully designed to slow movement and expose attackers to defenders above. These entrance systems were among the most impressive features of Maiden Castle. Long, twisting pathways forced visitors to move slowly between high banks of earth, creating controlled points of access into the settlement. For defenders standing above the gateways, the advantage would have been clear. But Maiden Castle was not simply a fortress, it was also a thriving community. Inside the massive earthworks, archaeologists have discovered evidence of hundreds of roundhouses that once filled the interior of the hill fort. These circular homes were built using wooden frames covered with thatch and mud walls, forming comfortable living spaces for families. The settlement may have supported a population of several hundred people. Within the walls, daily life followed the rhythms of the Iron Age countryside. Farmers cultivated crops such as barley and wheat in the fields surrounding the hill. Livestock grazed on nearby pasture land. Craftspeople produced tools, pottery, and metal objects used throughout the community. Smoke would have risen from hearth fires inside the roundhouses as meals were prepared and families gathered at the end of the day. The hill fort also served as a regional center where people from surrounding settlements may have gathered for trade, meetings, or social events. In many ways, Maiden Castle functioned as both a village and a symbol of authority within the landscape. Its massive earthworks would have been visible from miles away, a clear signal of power. Yet the history of Maiden Castle did not remain peaceful forever. By the 1st century CE, a new power was expanding across Europe, the Roman Empire. Roman armies began their invasion of Britain in 43 CE, bringing with them a professional military force equipped with advanced weapons, disciplined formations, and siege tactics. According to archaeological evidence, Maiden Castle may have been one of the sites caught in this dramatic moment of history. Excavations have uncovered skeletons within the hillfort showing signs of violent injuries, including wounds from Roman weapons. These discoveries suggest that the settlement may have been attacked during the Roman campaign in southern Britain. Arrowheads from Roman ballistae, powerful ancient siege weapons, were also found at the site, indicating that Roman forces likely targeted the hillfort during their advance through the region. Whether the attack was a full siege or a brief assault remains debated among historians. But the evidence suggests that the arrival of Rome marked the end of Maiden Castle's importance as a major hillfort. After the Roman conquest, new towns and administrative centers began to appear across Britain. One of these was the Roman settlement of Dornavaria, located nearby in what is now Dorchester. As Roman influence spread across the region, the large hill fort gradually lost its central role. The roundhouses were abandoned. The defensive ramparts slowly eroded under centuries of weather, and the once busy settlement returned to quiet grassland. Yet the earthworks remained, even today. The massive banks and ditches of Maiden Castle are still clearly visible, stretching across the hilltop in enormous, sweeping lines. From above, the site reveals the incredible scale of what Iron Age communities were capable of building with little more than hand tools and collective labor. Visitors walking across the grassy slopes today may find it difficult to imagine the bustling settlement that once stood here. But the shape of the land still preserves the memory of that ancient community, the pathways where people once walked, the defensive walls where guards once watched the horizon, and the hill that once stood at the center of Iron Age life in southern Britain. Maiden Castle remains one of the most powerful reminders of prehistoric Britain. Not a castle of stone towers and kings, but a fortress of earth and human determination, built long before written history began recording the stories of those who lived upon its hill. The cliff structures of Mesa Verde, in the high desert of the American Southwest, where deep canyons cut through the sandstone plateaus of Colorado, there is a landscape that holds one of the most remarkable architectural achievements in ancient North America. This place is known as Mesa Verde. From above, the region appears as a wide table-shaped plateau surrounded by steep cliffs and narrow valleys. Pine forests grow across the top of the mesa, while deep alcoves form naturally along the canyon walls below. For centuries, these cliffs seemed like nothing more than part of the rugged desert landscape, but hidden within the shadowed alcoves are entire stone villages, structures carefully built into the cliffs themselves. These are the famous cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde. The people who built these extraordinary homes were part of the ancestral Puebloan culture, sometimes referred to in earlier history as the Anasazi. Their ancestors had lived across the Southwest for thousands of years, gradually developing farming communities that adapted to the harsh desert environment. At first, these communities lived in small villages built on the tops of the mesas. Homes were constructed using stone blocks and wooden beams, arranged in compact clusters where families shared space and resources. Life on the mesa tops revolved around agriculture. The inhabitants cultivated crops such as corn, beans, and squash, often called the Three Sisters of traditional southwestern farming. These crops could survive in the dry climate and provided essential nutrition for the community. Water was scarce and rainfall unpredictable, so careful planning and cooperation were necessary for survival. Over time, the settlements grew larger. But around the 12th century, something began to change. Instead of building their homes on the mesa tops, many communities began constructing new villages within the natural alcoves of the canyon cliffs. These sheltered spaces provided protection from wind, rain, and the intense desert sun, and slowly entire cliff villages began to appear along the canyon walls. One of the most famous of these is Cliff Palace, the largest cliff dwelling ever discovered in North America. Cliff Palace contains more than 150 rooms, along with towers, courtyards, and ceremonial chambers known as kivas. From the canyon floor, the village appears almost like a stone city suspended beneath the overhanging rock, but Cliff Palace is only one example. Across the cliffs of Mesa Verde, hundreds of similar dwellings were built. Some were small clusters of homes. Others were large, complex communities connected by narrow pathways and ladders carved into the rock. The builders used sandstone blocks gathered from the surrounding cliffs and shaped them into rectangular bricks. These stones were held together with mortar made from mud and clay, creating sturdy walls that have survived for centuries. Wooden beams supported the roofs, while plastered walls helped seal the interiors against weather. Inside the cliff dwellings, life followed a structured and cooperative rhythm. Families lived in small rooms where daily activities such as cooking, tool making, and food storage took place. Corn was ground into flour using stone grinding tools. Pottery vessels held water and stored dried crops. Children grew up playing in the narrow courtyards between buildings. And at the center of many villages were the kivas. Kivas were circular underground chambers used for ceremonial and spiritual gatherings. These sacred spaces were essential to the cultural life of the pueblo and communities, serving as places for rituals, storytelling, and decision-making. Access to many cliff dwellings required climbing steep, stone steps or wooden ladders leading from the canyon floor to the alcoves above. This difficult access may have offered defensive advantages, making it harder for outsiders to reach the villages. But protection may not have been the only reason for building within the cliffs. The alcoves also created stable temperatures, keeping homes cooler in summer and warmer in winter. For communities living in the extreme climate of the Southwest, this natural shelter was extremely valuable. For more than a century, the cliff villages of Mesa Verde thrived. But by the late 1200s, the inhabitants began leaving the region. Village after village was gradually abandoned. The reasons for this migration are still debated by archaeologists. Evidence suggests that the region experienced a series of severe droughts during this period. Crop failures may have made it increasingly difficult to sustain the population. Other factors may have included social changes, shifting trade networks, or conflicts between communities. Whatever the cause, the people of Mesa Verde eventually moved south and east, joining other Puebloan communities in areas that are now part of New Mexico and Arizona. They did not disappear. Their descendants still live in Pueblo communities today. But the cliff dwellings were left behind. For centuries, the villages remained hidden in the canyon walls. Local indigenous communities were aware of their existence, but the wider world did not learn about them until the late 19th century, when explorers and archaeologists began documenting the ruins. When researchers first entered the cliff dwellings, they were astonished by how well preserved the structures were. The dry desert climate had protected the stone walls and many of the interior spaces. Tools, pottery, and everyday objects still remained inside some rooms, offering rare insights into the lives of the people who once lived there. Today, Mesa Verde is protected as a national park and UNESCO World Heritage Site, preserving one of the most important archaeological landscapes in North America. Visitors who look up at the cliffs can still see the ancient stone villages nestled within the alcoves, structures that once held families, ceremonies, and the daily life of an entire community. The cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde stand as a remarkable example of human ingenuity, a reminder that even in the harsh landscapes of the desert, ancient societies found ways to build homes, create culture, and leave behind lasting monuments to their lives. High in the canyon walls of Colorado, the stones of Mesa Verde still hold the memory of a civilization that learned how to live in harmony with the cliffs themselves, the Gantija temples. On the small Mediterranean island of Gozo, just northwest of Malta, a pair of massive stone structures rise from the landscape like something from a distant prehistoric world. Their walls are formed from enormous limestone blocks, some weighing several tons, stacked carefully together thousands of years ago. These ancient monuments are known as the Gantija temples. To the modern visitor, the ruins already appear impressive. But for the people who first encountered them centuries ago, the temples seemed almost impossible to explain. The stones were so large and the structures so old that local legends claimed they must have been built by giants. The name Gantija itself comes from the Maltese word gant, meaning giant. Yet the true builders were not giants. They were prehistoric farming communities who lived on the islands of Malta and Gozo more than 5,000 years ago, during a time when much of Europe was still in the early stages of organized settlement. In fact, the Gantija temples are among the oldest freestanding stone structures on Earth, older than both the pyramids of Egypt and the famous stone circle of Stonehenge. Their construction dates back to roughly 3,600 BCE, placing them deep within the Neolithic era. During this time, the islands of Malta and Gozo were home to small agricultural communities who had learned to cultivate crops and domesticate animals. These early societies were not large by modern standards, but they were highly organized and capable of remarkable achievements. The temples at Gantija represent the peak of their architectural ambition. The complex consists of two main temples built side by side, each enclosed by thick, curved walls made from enormous limestone blocks. Some of these stones are over 5 meters long and weigh several tons, yet they were carefully positioned without the use of metal tools or advanced machinery. Even today, archaeologists continue to study how these ancient builders managed to move and place such massive stones. One theory suggests that wooden rollers or sledges may have been used to transport the blocks across the landscape. Another possibility is that spherical stone rollers helped guide the stones into place during construction. Whatever methods they used, the builders clearly possessed a deep understanding of stonework and engineering. Inside the temples, the architecture follows a distinctive layout found in several prehistoric Maltese temple sites. A central entrance leads into a corridor that opens into a series of rounded chambers known as apses. These chambers curve outward from the central passage, creating a symmetrical floor plan that resembles the shape of a clover. The interior spaces were once decorated with plastered walls and stone altars. Archaeologists have discovered carved stones, decorative patterns, and fragments of statues that suggest the temples were used for ritual and ceremonial purposes. Although the exact nature of these rituals remains uncertain, many researchers believe the temples were connected to religious practices focused on fertility, agriculture, and the cycles of nature. Several small statues discovered in similar temple sites across Malta depict rounded human figures, often interpreted as fertility symbols. These discoveries have led some historians to believe that the temples may have been dedicated to a mother goddess or similar spiritual figure representing life and creation. Within the Gantija complex, certain chambers appear to have been used for offerings or ceremonial gatherings. Stone altars stand within some rooms, while fire marks suggest that rituals involving burning materials may have taken place here. The temples may have served as gathering places where communities came together during important seasonal events tied to planting, harvest, or spiritual traditions. Beyond their ceremonial role, the temples also reveal something important about the society that built them. Constructing structures of this size required careful planning, organized labor, and cooperation between many members of the community. This suggests that the people living on Gozo during the Neolithic period had developed a social system capable of coordinating large construction projects and maintaining shared religious traditions. For centuries, the temples likely stood at the center of life on the island. But eventually, around 2500 BCE, the temple building culture of Malta began to decline. Many of the monumental temple complexes across the islands were gradually abandoned. The reasons remain uncertain. Some researchers believe environmental pressures such as soil exhaustion or drought may have made farming more difficult. Others suggest that social changes or the arrival of new populations may have transformed the cultural landscape of the islands. Whatever the cause, the once busy temples slowly fell silent. Roofs collapsed. Walls eroded. and layers of soil gradually covered parts of the structures. For thousands of years, the temples remained largely undisturbed, their massive stones standing quietly in the fields of Gozo. It was not until the 19th century that archaeologists began carefully excavating the site and revealing its true age and importance. The discovery shocked historians. Until that time, many people believed that large-scale stone architecture in Europe began with later civilizations. But the Gantija temples proved that prehistoric societies were capable of building monumental structures far earlier than previously imagined. Today, the temples are recognized as part of the UNESCO World Heritage Group of Maltese Megalithic Temples, a collection of ancient sites considered among the most significant prehistoric monuments in the world. Visitors walking among the towering stones of Gantija can still see the curved walls and narrow passages that form the heart of the temple complex. Even in ruin, the scale of the construction remains impressive. These stones were placed here more than 5,000 years ago, by people whose names have long been forgotten, yet their work continues to stand. The Gantija temples remain one of the most powerful reminders that even the earliest farming communities possessed the vision, skill, and determination to create monuments that would outlast entire civilizations. And on the quiet island of Gozo, those ancient stones still hold the memory of a world that existed long before recorded history began. Dun Aungasa, on the western edge of Ireland, where the Atlantic Ocean meets a rugged limestone coastline, the Aran Islands rise from the sea like natural fortresses. These islands are known for their dramatic cliffs, powerful ocean winds, and landscapes shaped by thousands of years of human activity. On the island of Innis Moor, standing close to the edge of towering sea cliffs, lies one of the most impressive prehistoric fortifications in Ireland. This place is known as Dun Aungasa. At first glance, the structure appears simple. A series of massive stone walls stretch across the rocky plateau, forming a semicircular enclosure that faces inland. The opposite side of the fort opens directly onto cliffs that drop nearly 100 meters into the Atlantic below. Those cliffs were not an accident of geography. They were part of the defense. The builders of Dun Aungasa understood the power of the landscape around them. By placing their fort at the edge of the cliffs, they created a natural barrier that no attacker could cross. Only the landward side required protection. And that is where the massive stone walls were built. The fort dates back to the Iron Age, likely constructed sometime around the first millennium BCE. During this period, communities across Ireland were building fortified settlements on elevated ground. These hill forts served as centers of population, protection, and sometimes political authority within the surrounding region. Dun Aungasa quickly became one of the most remarkable examples of this tradition. 3 large defensive walls were constructed across the rocky terrain, each forming a protective ring around the interior of the fort. The walls were built from large limestone blocks gathered from the surrounding landscape. No mortar was used. Instead, the stones were carefully stacked and balanced, creating thick, defensive barriers capable of lasting for centuries. Between these walls were narrow entrance passages that controlled access to the interior. Anyone approaching the fort would have been forced to move slowly through these carefully designed gateways. But the most unusual defensive feature lies just outside the outer wall. Scattered across the rocky ground is a field of sharp limestone stones planted upright in the earth. This area is known as a chevaux de frise, a defensive obstacle designed to slow and disrupt attackers. The sharp stones made it difficult to run or advance quickly towards the walls. Anyone crossing the field would be forced to step carefully between the rocks, leaving them exposed to defenders standing above on the ramparts. It was a simple but effective system. Inside the walls, the central area of the fort opens into a wide enclosure. Today the interior is mostly empty, covered with grass and scattered stones. But archaeological evidence suggests that the space once contained houses and other structures where the inhabitants lived. Roundhouses made from stone and timber likely filled the interior. Families cooked food, crafted tools, and shared daily life within the protection of the walls. Farming and fishing would have supported the community, with fields and grazing areas located across the surrounding landscape of the Aran Islands. Life on the islands required resilience. The soil is thin and rocky, and strong Atlantic winds shaped the environment year-round. Yet generations of people adapted to these conditions, building stone walls across the island to create small agricultural fields and protect crops from the wind. Dun Aungasa stood as a central place within this landscape. From the top of the fort, the view stretches across the island and far out into the ocean. Anyone approaching the island by sea would have been visible long before reaching the shore. Travelers crossing the island would also be easily spotted from the walls. The location provided both protection and visibility. Over time, the fort became an important part of local tradition. Later stories connected the site to a legendary figure named Aongus, sometimes described as an ancient king or warrior. While historians cannot confirm these legends, the name eventually became attached to the site. Dun Aongasa, the Fort of Aongus. Centuries passed, and the settlement was eventually abandoned. The houses disappeared, and the daily life of the community faded from the hilltop. But the massive stone walls remained. Wind and rain slowly shaped the landscape, yet the structure continued standing at the edge of the cliffs. Today, Dun Aongasa is considered one of the most important prehistoric monuments in Ireland. Visitors walking across the limestone plateau can still see the powerful defensive walls stretching across the hilltop. Standing near the cliff edge, the view remains as dramatic as it must have been thousands of years ago. Ocean waves breaking below, wind moving across the stones, and the ancient fort still guarding the edge of the island. The Bighorn Medicine Wheel. High in the mountains of northern Wyoming, near the summit of Medicine Mountain, there lies an ancient stone structure that has puzzled historians and archaeologists for more than a century. At first glance, the site appears simple. A circle of stones laid carefully across the ground. Lines of rocks stretching outward like spokes from a wheel. But this quiet arrangement of stones sits more than 2,900 meters above sea level, in a remote landscape where snow, wind, and silence dominate the mountain. This is the Bighorn Medicine Wheel, one of the most remarkable ceremonial stone structures built by indigenous peoples in North America. The wheel itself measures roughly 25 meters in diameter, formed by a circular ring of limestone rocks placed across the mountain surface. From the center of the circle, 28 stone spokes radiate outward to the outer rim, creating the distinctive pattern that gives the structure its name. At the center of the wheel stands a small stone cairn, a pile of carefully stacked rocks that likely held special meaning for the people who built the site. Around the outer edge of the circle are several additional stone cairns positioned at key points along the rim. These features suggest that the structure was more than simply a decorative arrangement. It was a place with purpose, a place connected to ceremony, observation, and tradition. The exact age of the Bighorn Medicine Wheel is still debated, but most researchers believe it may have been built sometime between 300 and 800 years ago, though parts of the structure could be even older. Unlike many archaeological sites, the wheel was not built by a single culture in a single moment. Instead, it appears to have been used by multiple indigenous groups over long periods of time. Tribes such as the Crow, Blackfeet, Cheyenne, Lakota, and Shoshone all have cultural traditions connected to medicine wheels and sacred mountain sites. For these communities, high places often held deep spiritual significance. Mountains were seen as locations where the physical world and the spiritual world were closer together. Building a ceremonial site near the summit of Medicine Mountain may have been a way to connect with those beliefs. The wheel itself is carefully aligned with the surrounding landscape. Researchers studying the site have discovered that several of the outer cairns appear to line up with important astronomical events, including the rising of certain stars and the position of the sun during the summer solstice. These alignments suggest that the wheel may have functioned partly as a form of astronomical calendar, By observing the position of the sun or stars from specific points along the wheel, people could track seasonal changes in the sky. For societies that relied on hunting, gathering, and seasonal migration, understanding the cycles of nature was essential. The sky offered reliable patterns that could guide important activities throughout the year. But the Bighorn Medicine Wheel was likely more than an astronomical tool. In many indigenous traditions, medicine wheels symbolize the balance and interconnectedness of life. The circular shape represents the cycle of existence, the relationship between earth, sky, seasons, and human life. The spokes of the wheel may represent directions, paths, or spiritual journeys. Ceremonies held at the site could have involved prayer, offerings, or gatherings connected to these beliefs. Even today, the site remains sacred to many Native American communities. Because of this, the Bighorn Medicine Wheel is not simply an archaeological monument, it is also a living cultural site. Visitors who travel to Medicine Mountain often notice prayer offerings, ribbons, or small objects placed respectfully around the wheel. These items are left by indigenous visitors who continue to honor the site according to their traditions. The location itself adds to the mystery and importance of the structure. Building a stone monument at such a high elevation would not have been easy. The mountain summit is exposed to strong winds and harsh winter conditions. Transporting and arranging the stones required effort and dedication, yet the builders chose this place deliberately. From the site, the view stretches across the surrounding Bighorn Mountains, with distant ridges and valleys visible for miles in every direction. The sky above the mountain is wide and open. At night, the stars appear with extraordinary clarity. It is easy to understand why ancient observers might have chosen this location to study the movements of the heavens. For centuries, the wheel remained largely undisturbed. Local indigenous communities were always aware of its presence, but the wider world only learned of it in the late 19th century when explorers and researchers began documenting the site. Since then, archaeologists and historians have studied the wheel carefully, attempting to understand both its construction and its meaning. Yet some aspects of the site remain uncertain. The wheel does not contain written records or inscriptions explaining its purpose. Its true meaning lives within the traditions of the cultures connected to it, and those traditions continue to evolve. Today, the Bighorn Medicine Wheel is protected as a National Historic Landmark, recognized for its cultural, spiritual, and historical importance. Visitors can walk along the mountain path leading to the site and see the ancient circle of stones resting quietly on the summit. The wheel remains much as it has for centuries, a circle of rock beneath the open sky, a place where the earth, the mountains, and the stars come together, and where the traditions of the past continue to echo across the high ridges of Medicine Mountain. The early stone walls of Tel Sultan. In the fertile Jordan Valley, near the modern city of Jericho in the West Bank, there rises a large mound of earth and stone known as Tel Sultan. To a casual observer, it might look like just another hill in the desert landscape, but beneath its layers lies one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on Earth. For thousands of years, people returned to this same spot to build homes, grow crops, and form communities. Each generation built on top of the remains of the previous one, slowly creating the mound that archaeologists now call a tell. Inside this mound are the remains of an ancient settlement that changed the course of human history. Because here, more than 10,000 years ago, people built one of the earliest known stone fortification systems ever discovered. The story begins during the Neolithic period, around 8000 BCE, when human societies in the Near East were undergoing a profound transformation. For thousands of years, people had lived primarily as hunters and gatherers, moving from place to place in search of food. But in the fertile lands of the Jordan Valley, communities began experimenting with something new: agriculture. People started cultivating crops such as wheat and barley, while also domesticating animals and establishing permanent settlements. Jericho quickly became one of the earliest centers of this new way of life. The environment played an important role. Nearby springs provided a reliable source of fresh water, and the fertile soil of the valley allowed crops to grow in a region otherwise dominated by desert conditions. Over time, a growing population began to gather at Tel es Sultan, and with that growth came the need for protection and organization. At some point during this early phase of settlement, the inhabitants undertook an extraordinary project. They constructed a massive stone wall surrounding their community. This wall measured roughly 4 meters high and nearly 2 meters thick, built from large stones gathered from the surrounding area. For a settlement that existed more than 10,000 years ago, such construction was remarkable. But the wall was only part of the system. Inside the enclosure, the builders also constructed a stone tower rising nearly 8 meters high. A staircase built within the tower allowed people to climb to the top. Even today, the tower remains one of the most impressive architectural discoveries from the early Neolithic world. The purpose of these structures has long been debated. Some archaeologists believe the wall served as a defensive barrier, protecting the settlement from rival groups or potential attackers. Others have suggested that it may have helped control flooding from nearby seasonal streams. The tower itself may have functioned as a watchtower, allowing guards to observe the surrounding landscape from above. Yet there are also theories that the tower and wall had symbolic or ceremonial significance, representing the growing social organization of one of humanity's earliest urban communities. Whatever their exact purpose, the construction of these walls required enormous effort. Moving and stacking the stones would have required cooperation among many members of the settlement. The builders had no metal tools, no wheeled vehicles, and no advanced machinery. Everything was done with stone tools and human labor. This tells us something important about the society that existed at Jericho during this time. It was already capable of organizing large groups of people for complex construction projects. In other words, Jericho was beginning to function as one of the world's first cities. Within the protective walls, life continued to evolve. The inhabitants lived in circular houses made from mud bricks, built close together along narrow paths. Floors were often plastered smooth, and storage spaces held grains harvested from nearby fields. Food, production, craftwork, and social activities all took place within this early settlement. Over the centuries, the community continued to grow. New buildings replaced older ones. Walls were rebuilt or reinforced. And the mound of Tel es Sultan slowly rose higher as layers of history accumulated beneath each new generation of structures. Jericho's location along important travel routes between the Jordan Valley and surrounding highlands also made it a place where ideas and goods could move between different regions. Trade networks likely developed, connecting the settlement with other communities across the Near East. But Jericho's long history was not without interruptions. The settlement experienced periods of decline, abandonment, and rebuilding as environmental conditions changed and regional societies evolved. Over thousands of years, many different cultures occupied the site. Each left behind traces of their buildings, tools, and daily lives within the layers of the tell. Modern archaeological excavations began in the early 20th century, revealing the astonishing depth of Jericho's past. As researchers carefully removed layer after layer of soil, they uncovered the remains of ancient walls, houses, and artifacts that stretched back thousands of years. Among the most extraordinary discoveries were the early stone walls and tower from the Neolithic settlement. These structures pushed back the timeline of monumental architecture much further than historians had previously imagined. Before their discovery, many believed that large-scale stone construction only began with later civilizations. But the walls of Jericho proved that organized communities were capable of building massive structures thousands of years earlier. Today, Tel es Sultan stands as one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. Visitors walking through the ruins can see the remains of the ancient tower and the foundations of the early stone walls that once protected one of humanity's first permanent settlements. These stones mark the beginning of a long journey in human history, the moment when scattered groups of people began forming cities, building walls, and reshaping the landscape around them. In many ways, The story of Jericho is the story of the birth of urban civilization itself. And it all began here, with a settlement surrounded by stone walls rising from the fertile valley floor more than 10,000 years ago. The stepped structure of Monte de Codi. In the northwestern part of the island of Sardinia, surrounded by open fields and distant hills, stands one of the most unusual prehistoric monuments in the Mediterranean world. At first glance, the structure looks strangely out of place. A large platform rises from the ground, reached by a long stone ramp that climbs gradually toward the top. The form almost resembles a small pyramid or a stepped temple. But this monument was not built by Egyptians or Mesopotamian civilizations. It stands on the island of Sardinia, and it was built more than 5,000 years ago. This mysterious structure is known as Monte de Codi. Unlike many other prehistoric monuments found across Europe, Monte de Codi does not resemble a tomb, a stone circle, or a typical temple. Instead, its design appears strikingly similar to the stepped platforms known from ancient Mesopotamian architecture, particularly the early forms of ziggurats. This similarity has fascinated archaeologists for decades. Yet Monte de Codi developed in its own cultural environment among the prehistoric communities living on Sardinia during the Neolithic and early Bronze Age. The earliest phase of the structure was built around 4000 BCE. At that time, the people of Sardinia were already part of a network of agricultural communities that had spread across the Mediterranean. These societies cultivated crops, raised livestock, and established permanent villages throughout the island. But at Monte de Codi, they constructed something very different from ordinary settlements. The original structure began as a raised stone platform with a ramp leading to its top. Archaeologists believe the platform may have served as a ceremonial altar, where rituals or offerings were performed above ground level. The elevation of the platform may have symbolized a connection between the earth and the sky, a place where human activity met the divine. For a time, this early monument stood alone on the Sardinian plain, but centuries later, the site underwent a dramatic transformation. Around 3000 BCE, the original structure was intentionally buried beneath layers of earth and stone, and a much larger platform was built directly on top of it. The new monument was far more impressive. The stepped structure rose several meters high, and the ramp leading to the top became longer and more defined. The builders carefully shaped the exterior with stone blocks, giving the platform its distinctive pyramid-like appearance. This second phase of construction turned Monte de Codi into one of the most monumental prehistoric structures in Europe. The platform likely served as the center of important ceremonies performed by the surrounding communities. Unlike enclosed temples, the top of the structure was open to the sky. This suggests that rituals may have involved fire, offerings, or gatherings visible from the surrounding landscape. Archaeological excavations around the site have uncovered additional features that support this interpretation. Near the base of the platform stands a large altar stone, along with several standing stones that may have marked ceremonial spaces. Animal bones discovered at the site suggest that ritual sacrifices may have taken place during certain ceremonies. These offerings may have been connected to agricultural cycles, seasonal festivals, or spiritual traditions practiced by the people of ancient Sardinia. Monte de Codi was not simply an isolated monument. The surrounding area shows evidence of villages and activity connected to the ceremonial center. People likely traveled from nearby communities to participate in rituals or gatherings held at the platform. In this way, the structure may have served as a regional sacred site, bringing together different groups for shared traditions and beliefs. Yet, despite its importance, the monument eventually fell out of use. By the early Bronze Age, the site appears to have been abandoned. The reasons are still uncertain. Changes in social organization, shifts in trade networks, or evolving cultural traditions may have led people to move away from the ceremonial practices associated with the platform. Over time, the structure slowly deteriorated, stone blocks collapsed, soil and vegetation began covering parts of the monument. For thousands of years, Monte de Caudy remained largely forgotten. Local people were aware of the mound, but its true significance was not fully understood until modern archaeological excavations began in the 20th century. When researchers uncovered the stepped platform and its long ramp, they realized that the site represented something unique in the prehistoric world. No other structure in Europe quite resembles it. The design suggests that ancient Sardinian communities developed a monumental architectural style that parallels in some ways the temple platforms of distant civilizations. Yet Monte de Caudy was built entirely within its own cultural setting. A reminder that early societies across the world were experimenting with monumental architecture in different ways. Today, the restored structure stands once again above the surrounding plain. Visitors approaching the site can see the long ramp leading upward toward the flat platform, giving a clear impression of how the monument once appeared thousands of years ago. Standing at the top, it is easy to imagine ancient ceremonies taking place under the open sky. Fires burning on the altar, offerings placed before the gathered community, and the people of prehistoric Sardinia looking out across the landscape from one of the earliest monumental platforms ever constructed in Europe. Monte de Caudy remains one of the most intriguing archaeological mysteries of the Mediterranean, a stepped monument rising from the Sardinian plain, a structure that continues to raise questions about the beliefs and ambitions of the ancient people who built it. The solar towers of Chankillo. Along the dry coastal desert of northern Peru, where the landscape is shaped by sand, rock, and distant mountains, there stands one of the most fascinating ancient astronomical sites ever discovered in the Americas. The place is known as Chankillo. From a distance, the ruins may appear simple, a row of low stone towers stretching across the crest of a hill. But when viewed carefully, their arrangement reveals something remarkable. There are 13 towers standing in a straight line along the ridge, each tower built from stone, each placed with precise spacing, and together they form what is believed to be the oldest known solar observatory in the Americas. The towers of Chankillo date back more than 2,300 years, to around the 4th century BCE, long before the rise of the Inca Empire that would later dominate the Andes. During this period, ancient cultures along the Peruvian coast were already developing complex societies supported by agriculture, trade, and ceremonial traditions. These communities depended heavily on understanding the cycles of the sun. In the desert environment of coastal Peru, agriculture relied on carefully timed planting and harvesting seasons. Knowing when the seasons would change was essential for survival, and the people of Chankillo developed an extraordinary way of tracking time. The 13 towers were constructed along the ridge in a carefully planned line that runs roughly north to south. Viewed from specific observation points located on either side of the ridge, the towers create a kind of solar calendar. As the sun rises and sets throughout the year, its position on the horizon shifts slightly each day. When viewed from the observation platforms, the sun appears to rise or set directly behind different towers depending on the time of year. At the summer solstice, the sun rises near one end of the row of towers. At the winter solstice, it rises near the opposite end. On other days of the year, the sun aligns with the spaces between the towers. By watching these alignments, ancient observers could determine the exact time of year with remarkable accuracy. This system allowed them to track the full annual solar cycle. But Chankillo was not only an astronomical observatory. The surrounding site also contains the remains of a large fortified complex known as the Fortress of Chankillo. This fortress sits on a nearby hill surrounded by thick stone walls and defensive structures. The design of the fortress includes multiple gates, narrow corridors, and lookout points that suggest the builders were concerned with security. Yet archaeologists believe the fortress may have served not just military purposes, but also ceremonial or administrative roles connected to the solar towers. The fortress and the observatory together formed part of a larger sacred landscape. Within this landscape, the movement of the sun likely held deep symbolic meaning. Many ancient Andean cultures, the sun was associated with life, order, and the passage of time. Ceremonies marking the solstices or other important points in the solar cycle may have taken place at Chankillo, bringing communities together to celebrate seasonal transitions. The builders of Chankillo demonstrated an impressive understanding of astronomy. They recognized the subtle changes in the sun's position throughout the year and designed a structure that could record those changes using the landscape itself. This level of knowledge required careful observation over many years. Generations of skywatchers may have studied the horizon before the towers were finally constructed. The result was a monument that transformed the movement of the sun into a visible calendar written across the sky. For centuries, the towers of Chankillo continued to mark the passage of time, but eventually the site was abandoned. The reasons remain uncertain. Political changes, environmental pressures, or shifts in regional power may have led to the decline of the community that maintained the observatory. Without regular use, the fortress fell silent. Stone walls crumbled. Sand and desert winds slowly reshaped the landscape. For more than 2,000 years, the towers remained standing quietly on the ridge, their purpose forgotten by the outside world. It was not until modern archaeological studies began examining the site in detail that the true significance of the towers became clear. Researchers analyzing the alignments discovered that the towers correspond almost perfectly with the annual movement of the sun along the horizon. This discovery confirmed that Chankillo represents one of the earliest known examples of large-scale astronomical architecture in the Americas. Today, the site is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, valued not only for its historical importance, but also for the insight it provides into the scientific knowledge of ancient civilizations. Visitors standing at the observation points can still watch the sun rise behind the towers, just as it did thousands of years ago. The alignment remains visible, the sky continues its ancient cycle, and the 13 towers still stand along the ridge, marking the path of the sun across the desert horizon. A reminder that long before modern observatories and telescopes, ancient societies were already studying the heavens and building monuments that connected human life to the movements of the cosmos. Dolmen de la Roche aux Fées. In the quiet countryside of Brittany, in northwestern France, a long line of massive stones stands among the fields near the village of Essay. From a distance, the structure looks almost like a ruined stone corridor, its enormous slabs resting heavily on top of upright pillars. This ancient monument is known as the Dolmen de la Roche aux Fées, which translates roughly to the Rock of the Fairies. The name comes from a local legend. For generations, people believed that only supernatural beings could have built something so enormous. According to the stories, fairies carried the giant stones during the night and assembled the monument before dawn. The truth is just as remarkable. The structure was built by prehistoric communities more than 4,000 years ago. During the Neolithic period, long before written history reached this region of Europe, and even today, the sheer scale of the monument raises questions about how its builders managed such a feat. The dolmen itself stretches nearly 20 meters in length, making it one of the largest megalithic tombs in France. It consists of more than 40 massive stones, some weighing over 40 tons, arranged in a long rectangular chamber. Large upright stones form the walls. Flat stone slabs rest across the top, creating a roof that has survived thousands of years of wind and weather. Originally, the structure would have been covered by a mound of earth and smaller stones known as a tumulus, forming a burial mound that enclosed the chamber completely. Over time, the outer mound eroded away, leaving the stone skeleton of the tomb exposed. What remains today is the inner structure, the enormous corridor that once formed the heart of the burial monument. The builders carefully selected and transported the stones from nearby areas. Without metal tools wheeled vehicles, or modern construction techniques, they relied entirely on human strength and ingenuity. The stones were likely moved using wooden rollers, sledges, ropes, and large teams of workers cooperating together. Positioning them required careful planning. Each supporting stone had to be placed securely before the massive capstones were lifted and balanced across the top. The precision of the construction allowed the monument to survive for thousands of years. But the Dolmen de la Roche-aux-Fées was not simply an engineering project. It served an important purpose within the society that built it. The structure functioned as a collective burial chamber. During the Neolithic period, communities often buried their dead within shared monuments, rather than individual graves. These tombs became places where generations of families were laid to rest together. Inside the chamber, archaeologists have discovered traces of human remains along with fragments of pottery and tools placed as offerings. These objects suggest that burial ceremonies took place within the tomb, possibly involving rituals meant to honor the dead or maintain a connection between the living and their ancestors. The long corridor leading into the chamber may have carried symbolic meaning. Some researchers believe the passage represented a transition from the world of the living to the world of the ancestors. Walking into the tomb would have been a ceremonial journey into a sacred space. The orientation of the monument adds another layer of mystery. The entrance of the dolmen faces roughly toward the winter solstice sunrise. On certain days of the year, sunlight enters the chamber in a particular way, illuminating parts of the interior. Although the exact intention behind this alignment is still debated, many prehistoric monuments across Europe appear to have been connected to astronomical events. For early farming societies, the cycles of the sun played an important role in marking seasons for planting and harvesting. The monument's alignment may have reflected the importance of these seasonal rhythms. Beyond its practical and ceremonial functions, the Dolmen de la Roche-aux-Fées also stood as a visible landmark within the landscape. When the mound still covered the chamber, the monument would have appeared as a large hill rising above the surrounding fields. Such structures often served as territorial markers or gathering places where communities met during important events. They reminded people of the presence of their ancestors and the continuity of their society. Over the centuries, however, the surrounding landscape changed. The earth mound slowly eroded, stone blocks shifted, and the burial chamber became exposed to the open air. Yet the monument endured. Empires rose and fell across Europe. Cultures changed. But the massive stones remained standing. Local legends continued to grow around the site. Stories of fairies, spirits, and ancient magic became part of the monument's identity, preserving its mystery even as its true origins were forgotten. It was not until the 19th century that archaeologists began studying the dolmen more carefully, recognizing it as part of a widespread network of megalithic monuments built across Western Europe during the Neolithic period. These structures include standing stones, stone circles, and burial chambers similar to the one at Roche-aux-Fées. Together, they represent some of the earliest monumental architecture ever created by farming societies in Europe. Today, the Dolmen de la Roche-aux-Fées remains one of the most impressive examples of this tradition. Visitors walking along the ancient corridor can still see the massive stones rising above them, forming a chamber that has stood for more than 4 millennia. Standing inside the monument, surrounded by stones placed by human hands thousands of years ago, it becomes easier to imagine the ceremonies that once took place here. The gathering of communities, the burial of ancestors, the quiet rituals performed within the stone chamber. The Dolmen de la Roche-aux-Fées continues to stand in the fields of Brittany, not built by fairies, but by a prehistoric society whose achievements still inspire wonder today. The Passage Tomb of New Grinch. In the green countryside of Eastern Ireland, along a bend of the River Boyne, stands one of the most extraordinary prehistoric monuments in the world. From the outside, it appears as a large circular mound rising gently from the surrounding landscape, its surface covered with grass and edged with a ring of standing stones. This ancient structure is known as Newgrange. At first glance, it may look like a simple burial mound, but Newgrange is far more than that. It is a carefully designed passage tomb built more than 5,000 years ago, making it older than both Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids of Egypt. The monument dates back to around 3200 BCE. During the Neolithic period, when early farming communities were spreading across Europe, the people who built Newgrange were part of these early agricultural societies. They cultivated crops, raised livestock, and formed organized communities along the fertile lands of the Boyne Valley, but they also possessed remarkable knowledge of architecture, engineering, and the movement of the sky. The structure itself measures about 85 meters in diameter, forming a large circular mound built from layers of earth and stone. Surrounding the base of the mound is a ring of massive curbstones, many of which are decorated with intricate carvings. These carvings include spirals, zigzag patterns, and geometric designs, some of the most famous examples of prehistoric art in Europe. The entrance to the tomb lies along the southeastern side of the mound. A narrow stone passage extends inward from this entrance, leading deep into the heart of the monument. The corridor stretches nearly 19 meters, constructed from tall stone slabs placed upright along the sides and topped with massive stone lintels forming the roof. At the end of the passage lies a central chamber shaped like a cross. 3 small alcoves branch outward from the chamber, each containing large stone basins that once held the remains of the dead. Like many passage tombs of the Neolithic world, Newgrange served as a collective burial site where members of the community were laid to rest. But the monument was designed with far greater complexity than a simple tomb. The builders incorporated one of the most precise astronomical alignments ever discovered in prehistoric architecture. Above the entrance to the passage lies a small rectangular opening known as the roof box. For most of the year, sunlight never reaches the interior of the tomb. But during the winter solstice around December 21st, something extraordinary happens. As the sun rises above the horizon, its first rays shine directly through the roof box. The light travels along the narrow stone passage and slowly illuminates the inner chamber deep within the mound. For a few minutes each year, the entire chamber fills with golden sunlight. Then the light fades again as the sun continues rising. This precise alignment demonstrates that the builders of Newgrange carefully observed the movement of the sun and incorporated that knowledge into the design of the monument. For early agricultural societies, the winter solstice marked an important turning point in the year. The longest night had passed, the days would slowly begin growing longer again. For people dependent on the cycles of nature, this moment likely held deep symbolic meaning. The illumination of the burial chamber may have represented renewal, rebirth, or the connection between the world of the living and the world of the ancestors. Constructing Newgrange required an enormous amount of effort. Archaeologists estimate that the monument contains more than 200,000 tons of stone and earth. Many of the stones used in the structure were transported from distant locations, including large slabs of granite brought from mountains many kilometers away. Moving these stones without metal tools or wheeled vehicles would have required careful planning and cooperation among large groups of people. The builders likely used wooden rollers, sledges, and rope systems to transport the materials across the landscape. The scale of the project suggests that Newgrange served as a major ceremonial center for the communities living throughout the Boyne Valley. Nearby sites such as Noath and Douth form part of the same prehistoric complex, indicating that the region held special importance during the Neolithic period. For centuries, the monument stood as a place where rituals, ceremonies, and burials took place. But eventually the society that built Newgrange changed. By the Bronze Age, the tomb was no longer used in the same way. The entrance became partially sealed and the mound gradually fell into disuse. Over time, the monument became covered by soil and vegetation. Yet the structure remained remarkably intact. Local legends later connected the mound with the Tuatha De Danann, mythical beings in Irish folklore said to have lived beneath the earth. Stories describe the mound as a magical dwelling place belonging to ancient gods or spirits. These legends help preserve the site's mystery even as its true origins faded from memory. Modern archaeological excavations in the 20th century revealed the full complexity of the monument. Researchers carefully restored the structure and studied its carvings, architecture, and astronomical alignment. Today, Newgrange is recognized as one of the most important prehistoric sites in the world. It forms part of the Brú-na-Bóinne UNESCO World Heritage Site, protecting the remarkable collection of Neolithic monuments in the Boyne Valley. Visitors who enter the passage today can still experience the same narrow corridor that leads into the ancient chamber. And every winter solstice, a small number of people are allowed to witness the sunrise illumination that the builders designed thousands of years ago. For a few moments, the chamber fills with light once, again, just as it did 5,000 years ago. A reminder that the people who built Newgrange understood both the earth beneath their feet and the sky above them with extraordinary precision, and their monument continues to stand as one of the greatest achievements of prehistoric architecture. The Avebury Stone Complex. In the countryside of Wiltshire, England, surrounded by rolling green fields and quiet villages, lies one of the largest prehistoric stone monuments ever built in Europe. This vast ancient site is known as Avebury. At first glance, the area looks peaceful and almost ordinary. Sheep graze in open pastures, and small roads pass through the nearby village. But hidden within this landscape is an enormous, circular monument created more than 4,000 years ago. Unlike many prehistoric stone sites, Avebury is not a single structure. It is an entire stone complex built on a scale that still surprises archaeologists today. The center of the site is dominated by a massive stone circle. This outer ring measures about 330 meters in diameter, making it the largest stone circle in Britain. Surrounding the stones is an enormous earthwork consisting of a deep ditch and a high bank of soil that forms a complete circular enclosure. The ditch itself was dug using simple tools made from stone and bone, yet the trench reaches depths of up to 11 meters in some places. The soil removed from the ditch was piled up to create the outer bank, forming a huge ring that still dominates the landscape. Inside this enclosure once stood nearly 100 giant standing stones, many of them weighing several tons. Today, only part of the original circle remains, but the scale of the monument can still be clearly seen. Unlike the famous site of Stonehenge, where stones are arranged in carefully shaped structures, the stones at Avebury appear more natural. They were not carved into precise forms. Instead, large blocks of local sarsen stone were raised upright and positioned in a broad circle across the landscape. Within the outer circle stood two smaller stone circles, creating an additional layer of complexity in the design. These inner circles likely served different ceremonial or symbolic purposes, though their exact function remains uncertain. Archaeologists believe the construction of Avebury began around 2600 BCE, during the late Neolithic period. At this time, farming communities had already been living in southern Britain for many centuries. These societies cultivated crops, raised livestock, and gradually developed complex systems of ritual and social organization. Avebury appears to have been one of the largest ceremonial centers of this prehistoric world. The effort required to construct the monument was enormous. Digging the ditch alone would have required moving hundreds of thousands of tons of earth using only primitive tools. The stones themselves were transported from nearby areas and lifted upright using wooden supports, ropes, and the coordinated labor of large groups of people. This kind of project would have required careful planning and leadership. It suggests that the communities who built Avebury were capable of organizing large-scale construction efforts involving many participants. The monument likely served as a place where different groups gathered during important times of the year. Ceremonies, festivals, and rituals may have taken place within the stone circles, bringing communities together across the surrounding region. The site also forms part of a larger prehistoric landscape filled with ancient monuments. Nearby are long barrows, burial mounds, and ceremonial pathways connecting different sacred locations. One of the most famous of these is the West Kennet Avenue, a long avenue of standing stones that once linked Avebury with another ceremonial site located several kilometers away. The avenue created a processional path leading into the stone circle. Walking along this route would have been a powerful experience, gradually approaching the massive stones rising inside the circular enclosure. Many archaeologists believe that Avebury was connected to the cycles of the sun and moon. Certain alignments within the monument appear to correspond with astronomical events such as solstices or seasonal changes. Although the exact meaning of these alignments remains debated, prehistoric societies often built monuments that reflected the rhythms of nature and the movement of the sky. For people dependent on agriculture, understanding the seasons was essential. The monument may have helped mark important moments in the yearly cycle. Over time, however, the importance of Avebury began to fade. During the Bronze Age and later periods, new cultural traditions emerged across Britain. The Great Stone Circle was gradually abandoned. Centuries passed, and the landscape around the monument slowly changed. Some of the standing stones fell over. Others were buried or removed by later inhabitants who feared the ancient monument or reused its stones for building materials. By the medieval period, many of the original stones had disappeared, yet the enormous earthworks surrounding the site remained visible. Even after thousands of years, the circular ditch and bank still define the shape of the ancient enclosure. Modern archaeological research has helped reveal the scale and complexity of the monument once again. Today, Avebury is protected as part of the Stonehenge and Avebury World Heritage Site, recognizing its importance as one of the greatest surviving examples of prehistoric ceremonial architecture. Visitors walking through the village of Avebury can still see several of the remaining standing stones rising from the grass. Unlike many ancient monuments that are fenced off, Avebury allows people to walk freely among the stones. Standing inside the circle, it becomes easier to imagine what the site might have looked like thousands of years ago, and dozens of towering stones forming a ring across the landscape. Large gatherings of people arriving along ancient pathways. Ceremonies unfolding beneath the open sky. The Avebury Stone Complex remains one of the most impressive prehistoric landscapes in Europe, a monument built not as a single structure, but as an entire ceremonial environment shaped by the hands of Neolithic communities more than 4,000 years ago. And even today, the stones and earthworks of Avebury continue to stand quietly in the fields of southern England, preserving the memory of one of the most ambitious monuments of the ancient world. Machu Picchu Royal Estate. High in the Andes Mountains of Peru, where steep green peaks rise above deep river valleys and clouds drift slowly across the mountain ridges, lies one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. This place is known as Machu Picchu. Hidden among the mountains nearly 2,400 meters above sea level, the ancient city sits on a narrow ridge between two towering peaks. From a distance, the ruins seem almost impossible, as if a stone city had been carefully placed among the clouds. Yet Machu Picchu was not built by accident. It was constructed by the Inca civilization during the 15th century, at the height of one of the most powerful empires ever to exist in South America. Unlike many ancient cities, Machu Picchu was not a crowded urban center filled with thousands of inhabitants. Instead, historians believe it functioned primarily as a royal estate, a secluded mountain retreat built for the Inca ruler Pachacuti, the emperor who expanded the Inca Empire across much of the Andes. Pachacuti ruled during a period of enormous growth for the empire. Under his leadership, the Incas developed advanced systems of agriculture, engineering, and administration that allowed them to control vast territories stretching from modern-day Colombia to Chile. Machu Picchu may have been built as a place where the emperor and his court could retreat from the political center of the empire, a place for ceremonies, administration, and relaxation within the dramatic landscape of the Andes. The location itself was carefully chosen. The city sits on a ridge overlooking the Urubamba River Valley. surrounded by steep cliffs that provide natural protection on nearly every side. The surrounding mountains were not obstacles for the Incas. They were part of the design. The city appears to be aligned with the landscape in ways that reflect Inca beliefs about the sacred nature of mountains, which were known as apus. These mountains were hold spiritual power and were closely connected to Inca religious traditions. The layout of Machu Picchu reflects both practical engineering and symbolic meaning. The city is divided into several major sectors. One area contains residential buildings, where members of the royal court, priests, and servants lived. Another area includes ceremonial spaces, temples, and open plazas used for gatherings and rituals. One of the most striking features of the site is its system of agricultural terraces. These terraces cover the slopes below the city, forming long stepped platforms built from stone walls filled with soil. The terraces served several purposes. They created farmland where crops could be grown. They prevented erosion on the steep mountain slopes, and they helped manage rainfall by controlling the flow of water across the landscape. The Incas were masters of water engineering. Within Machu Picchu, a complex network of stone channels carried fresh spring water through the city. Fountains and drainage systems ensured that water flowed safely through the settlement without damaging the buildings. The architecture itself demonstrates the extraordinary stoneworking skills of Inca builders. The walls were constructed using precisely cut stone blocks fitted together so tightly that no mortar was needed to hold them in place. In some buildings, the stones fit so perfectly that even a thin blade cannot be inserted between them. This technique made the structures highly resistant to earthquakes, which are common in the Andean region. Many of the buildings were arranged around open courtyards, creating spaces where daily activities took place. One of the most important ceremonial structures is the Temple of the Sun, a curved stone building believed to have been used for astronomical observations and religious rituals. Nearby stands the Intihuatana stone, often described as a ritual object connected to the movement of the sun. The name Intihuatana means hitching post of the sun, suggesting that it may have been used to mark important solar events, such as solstices. For the Incas, the sun god Inti held great importance. Solar ceremonies were central to the religious life of the empire, and sites like Machu Picchu may have been used to observe and celebrate these celestial events. Despite its impressive design, Machu Picchu was not occupied for very long. Historians believe the site was used for less than a century before it was abandoned in the 16th century. This period coincided with the arrival of Spanish forces in the Andes. Although there is no clear evidence that the Spanish ever discovered Machu Picchu, the collapse of the Inca Empire likely disrupted the systems that supported the remote mountain estate. Without the imperial administration that maintained it, the site was gradually abandoned. The buildings remained intact, but the jungle slowly began reclaiming the mountain ridge. For centuries, the city remained hidden beneath vegetation. Local farmers living in the region were aware of the ruins, but the outside world did not learn of Machu Picchu until 1911, when American explorer Hiram Bingham brought international attention to the site. Bingham's expedition helped reveal the remarkable condition of the ancient city. Because the Spanish had never destroyed it and the remote location protected it from large-scale settlement, many of the stone structures remain standing. Today, Machu Picchu is recognized as one of the greatest architectural achievements of the Inca civilization. It is protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and visited by people from around the world. Standing among the ruins today, surrounded by mist-covered mountains, it becomes clear that the Incas built something far more than a simple royal residence. They created a city that blended architecture, engineering, and the natural landscape into a single harmonious design. A royal estate placed high in the Andes, a place where stone, mountain, and sky come together. Choquequirao hidden citadel. Deep within the rugged mountains of southern Peru, far from major cities and hidden among steep valleys of the Andes, lies one of the most mysterious archaeological sites of the Inca world. This place is known as Choquequirao. The name comes from the Quechua language and is often translated as Cradle of Gold. Yet, despite its impressive name, Choquequirao remained largely unknown to the outside world for centuries. Unlike Machu Picchu, which eventually became famous and accessible, Choquequirao sits in an extremely remote part of the Andes. The only way to reach it even today is by trekking across mountain trails that descend into deep valleys and climb back up steep slopes. The journey itself can take several days, but for those who reach the site, the reward is extraordinary. High above the Apurimac River, surrounded by dramatic mountain peaks, the stone ruins of an ancient city stretch across a series of terraces carved into the hillside. This is Choquequirao, often called the sister city of Machu Picchu. Like Machu Picchu, Choquequirao was built by the Inca civilization during the 15th century, a time when the Inca Empire controlled vast territories across the Andes. At its height, the empire stretched thousands of kilometers, from modern-day Colombia in the north to Chile and Argentina in the south. Maintaining control over such a vast region required a network of administrative centers, ceremonial sites, and fortified settlements connected by an extensive system of mountain roads. Choquequirao appears to have been one of these important centers. The city sits at an elevation of about 3,000 meters, positioned strategically along routes that linked different regions of the empire. From its terraces, the view stretches across the deep canyon of the Apurimac River, one of the most dramatic landscapes in the Andes. The location was both beautiful and strategic. Approaching the city would have been difficult for outsiders. Steep mountains and narrow trails created natural defenses around the settlement. But for the Inca engineers who built the site, the challenging terrain was simply another opportunity to demonstrate their remarkable construction skills. Like many Inca cities, Choquequirao is organized into distinct sectors connected by stone pathways and terraces. The terraces are among the most impressive features of the site. Hundreds of agricultural terraces descend down the mountainside, forming long horizontal steps that follow the natural contours of the slope. These terraces served multiple purposes. They created farmland where crops could be cultivated in the thin mountain soil. They stabilized the slopes to prevent landslides, and they helped control water flow during heavy rainfall. Within the city itself are plazas, residential buildings, ceremonial spaces, and temples constructed using the precise stonework typical of Inca architecture. The stones were carefully shaped and fitted together without mortar, creating walls strong enough to withstand the frequent earthquakes of the Andean region. In the center of the settlement lies a large ceremonial plaza surrounded by important buildings. Nearby stands a structure believed to have served as a temple, possibly dedicated to the Inca sun god Inti, who held central importance in Inca religion. Other areas of the city appear to have been used as living quarters for administrators, priests, and workers responsible for maintaining the site. One of the most unusual discoveries at Choquequirao can be found on a series of terraces along the western side of the complex. Embedded within the terrace walls are white stone figures shaped like llamas. These llama figures are formed by carefully placing light-colored stones into the darker terrace walls, creating large images visible from across the valley. The designs are believed to represent caravans of llamas, animals that played a crucial role in Andean transportation and trade. These decorative terraces demonstrate that Choquequirao was not only a functional settlement, but also a place where artistic and symbolic elements were incorporated into the architecture. Despite its impressive design, Choquequirao was occupied for a relatively short time. Its decline likely occurred during the early 16th century, when Spanish forces began conquering the Inca Empire. As the empire collapsed under Spanish pressure, many remote settlements were abandoned. Some Inca leaders attempted to retreat into the mountains and continue resisting Spanish rule. Choquequirao may have served briefly as a refuge during this chaotic period. Eventually, however, the site was deserted. Without maintenance, vegetation slowly began reclaiming the terraces and buildings. The dense Andean forest gradually covered large sections of the city. For centuries, the ruins remained hidden beneath the jungle. Local communities living in the region knew about the site, but it was rarely visited by outsiders. It was not until the 18th and 19th centuries that explorers began documenting the ruins more carefully. Even today, archaeologists estimate that only about 30 to 40% of Choquequirao has been fully excavated. Much of the ancient city still lies buried beneath vegetation and soil. This means that Choquequirao may hold many secrets that have yet to be discovered. Because of its remote location, the site receives far fewer visitors than Machu Picchu. But for those who make the journey, Choquequirao offers a rare opportunity to experience an Inca city in a much quieter and more untouched environment. Standing among the terraces and stone walls, surrounded by towering mountains and deep valleys, it becomes clear that Choquequirao was not simply a remote outpost. It was a carefully designed Andean city, a place where architecture, landscape, and culture came together high in the mountains of Peru. And even after centuries of abandonment, the hidden citadel continues to emerge slowly from the forest, revealing the remarkable achievements of the civilization that built it. The Caral Pyramid Complex. Along the desert coast of Peru, about 200 kilometers north of modern-day Lima, the landscape appears quiet and almost empty. Dry valleys cut through the desert, and the surrounding hills are shaped by wind and time. At first glance, the region does not seem like the place where one of the oldest civilizations in the Americas once thrived. But hidden within the Soup Valley lies the ancient city of Caral. Today, the site appears as a group of low hills and large mounds rising from the valley floor. Yet these mounds are not natural formations. They are the remains of enormous pyramids and ceremonial platforms, built more than 5,000 years ago by a civilization that existed long before the rise of the Inca Empire. Caral is considered one of the oldest urban centers in the Western Hemisphere, dating back to around 2600 BCE. At the time Caral was developing, civilizations were also emerging in places like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley, but the people of Caral created their own complex society independently in the valleys of coastal Peru. The city covered more than 60 hectares, making it one of the largest settlements of its time in the region. Within this space stood a series of monumental structures, including several large pyramids constructed from stone and earth. These pyramids were not built as tombs like the famous pyramids of Egypt. Instead, they functioned as ceremonial and administrative centers. The largest pyramid at Caral rises more than 28 meters high and sits within a large, open plaza surrounded by terraces and stairways. From the top of the structure, leaders and priests may have overseen gatherings or rituals held in the plaza below. Across the city, archaeologists have identified 6 major pyramidal platforms, each surrounded by plazas, residential areas, and smaller buildings. The design of the city suggests careful planning. Large open plazas created spaces for gatherings and ceremonies. Residential areas were arranged around these central spaces, forming neighborhoods where people lived and worked. The builders of Caral used stone blocks and earth-filled baskets, known as shikras, to construct the pyramid structures. These woven bags were filled with stones and stacked within the walls of the buildings, creating stable foundations that helped absorb the energy of earthquakes. Even thousands of years ago, the builders understood the importance of constructing earthquake-resistant structures in this seismically active region. Life in Caral was supported by agriculture and trade. Although the surrounding desert might seem harsh, the nearby Supi River provided water that allowed crops to grow in the valley. Farmers cultivated plants such as cotton, beans, squash, and chili peppers. Cotton was especially valuable because it was used to produce fishing nets. These nets were traded with coastal communities, who in return provided fish and other seafood. This exchange created a strong economic relationship between inland farmers and coastal fishermen. Unlike many ancient civilizations, Caral shows little evidence of warfare. archaeologists have found no signs of defensive walls, weapons, or fortifications. Instead, the city appears to have functioned primarily as a ceremonial and cultural center, where religious and social activities played a central role. Music and ritual may have been important parts of life here. Excavations at the site have uncovered ancient musical instruments, including flutes made from bird bones and cornets crafted from animal bones. These instruments suggest that ceremonial gatherings may have involved music, performance, and communal participation. Religion likely played a major role in organizing society. Priests or spiritual leaders may have overseen rituals connected to agriculture, seasonal cycles, and the natural environment. The pyramids themselves probably served as platforms for these ceremonies where important events were observed by the community. The scale of the construction at Caral suggests a highly organized society capable of coordinating large numbers of workers. Building the pyramids required the movement of thousands of tons of stone and earth without metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or large animals for transport. This work would have required careful planning and cooperation among many people. Caral was not isolated. It was the center of a broader network of settlements throughout the Soup Valley. Smaller communities surrounding the city were connected through shared economic and cultural systems. Together, they formed what archaeologists now call the Nord-Chico civilization, one of the earliest complex societies in the Americas. For centuries, Caral remained an active and thriving center. But eventually, around 1800 BCE, the city was gradually abandoned. The reasons for this decline are still being studied. Environmental changes, including possible shifts in climate or flooding events, may have affected the agricultural systems that supported the population. Over time, the pyramids and plazas were left behind. Sand and wind slowly covered the structures, preserving them beneath layers of desert soil. For thousands of years, the ruins remained largely unnoticed. The mounds were visible across the valley, but their true significance was not fully understood until archaeological research in the late 20th century revealed the scale and age of the site. Today, Caral is recognized as one of the oldest known cities in the Americas and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors walking through the ancient city can still see the massive pyramidal structures rising from the desert valley, connected by plazas and terraces that once formed the heart of a remarkable civilization. Caral reminds us that long before the famous empires of the Americas, people were already building cities, organizing societies, and shaping the landscapes around them. And in the quiet desert valley of Peru, the pyramids of Caral continue to stand as silent witnesses to one of the earliest chapters of a human civilization in the New World. Monk's Mound at Cahokia. In the wide floodplains of the Mississippi River Valley, not far from the modern city of St. Louis, lies one of the most extraordinary archaeological landscapes in North America. At first glance, the site appears as a series of grassy hills rising gently from the surrounding fields. But these hills are not natural. They are the remains of an ancient city. This place is known as Cahokia, and at the heart of the city stands the largest prehistoric earthwork ever built in the Americas, Monk's Mound. Monk's Mound dominates the landscape of Cahokia. Even today, its size is difficult to ignore. The structure rises nearly 30 meters high and covers an area of more than 5 hectares, making it larger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza. But unlike the pyramids of Egypt, Monk's Mound was not built from stone. It was constructed entirely from earth. The mound was created by transporting enormous quantities of soil, basket by basket, and carefully stacking the layers to form a massive step platform. Archaeologists estimate that more than 600,000 cubic meters of earth were used in its construction. For the people who built it, this was an extraordinary achievement. Cahokia itself flourished between 1000 and 1300 CE, during a period known as the Mississippian culture. At its height, the city may have supported a population of 15,000 to 20,000 people, making it one of the largest urban centers north of Mexico at the time. The city was carefully planned. Large plazas formed the central spaces where people gathered for ceremonies and public events. Surrounding these plazas were residential neighborhoods, craft workshops, and additional earthen mounds. In total, the city once contained more than 100 mounds of various sizes, but Monk's Mound was the largest and most important of them all. The mound consists of several terraced levels, each rising above the one below it. At the summit stood a large building, likely constructed from wood and thatch. This structure may have served as the residence of an important leader, or as a temple where religious ceremonies were conducted. From the top of the mound, the view stretched across the entire city. Anyone standing there could see the central plaza below, the surrounding neighborhoods, and the distant floodplains of the Mississippi River. The elevation was not only practical, it was symbolic. In many Mississippian cultures, high places were associated with spiritual power and leadership. By placing important buildings on top of large mounds, the society created a physical representation of authority and connection to the spiritual world. The construction of Monk's Mound likely took place in several stages over many years. Workers gathered soil from nearby areas, carrying it in woven baskets and carefully shaping each layer of the mound. Different types of soil were used in different layers, helping stabilize the structure and prevent erosion. This careful engineering allowed the mound to survive for centuries. The city surrounding the mound was vibrant and active. Farmers cultivated crops such as maize, beans, and squash in the fertile lands of the Mississippi floodplain. These crops supported the large population living within the city. Trade networks connected Cahokia to distant regions across North America. Archaeologists have discovered materials of the site that originated hundreds of kilometers away, including copper from the Great Lakes region, shells from the Gulf Coast, and stone from the Appalachian Mountains. These discoveries suggest that Cahokia played an important role in a vast network of cultural and economic exchange. Religion and ceremony were central parts of life in the city. One of the most fascinating features of Cahokia is a structure known as Woodhenge, a large circle of wooden posts that functioned as a solar calendar. By observing the position of the rising sun in relation to the posts, the inhabitants could track important seasonal events such as solstices and equinoxes. These observations likely helped determine the timing of agricultural activities and ceremonial gatherings. Monk's Mound stood at the center of this ceremonial landscape. The plaza in front of the mound may have hosted large gatherings where thousands of people participated in rituals, festivals, and political events. Yet despite its size and importance, the city of Cahokia did not last forever. By around 1300 CE, the population began to decline. The reasons for this decline remain uncertain. Some researchers suggest that environmental changes, including flooding or soil depletion, may have affected agriculture. Others believe that social tensions, political instability, or disease may have contributed to the abandonment of the city. Over time, the inhabitants moved away. The wooden buildings collapsed. Vegetation began covering the earthworks. For centuries, the massive mound remained visible in the landscape, but the memory of the great city that once surrounded it slowly faded. When European settlers arrived in the region centuries later, they saw the large mound, but did not fully understand its origins. In the 19th century, a group of Trappist monks briefly lived near the mound, giving it the name Monk's Mound. Modern archaeological research has since revealed the extraordinary history of Cahokia and the civilization that built it. Today, the site is preserved as the Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site and recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors climbing the steps of Monk's Mound can stand at the top and look out across the ancient city that once existed there. The grassy terraces remain. The open plaza stretches below, and the Mississippi River still flows across the distant floodplain. Monk's Mound stands as a powerful reminder that long before European contact, complex societies were already building cities, organizing communities, and shaping the landscapes of North America. And at the center of one of those cities stood this immense mound of earth, a monument to the ambition and ingenuity of the people who built Cahokia. The Newark Octagon Earthworks. In the rolling landscape of central Ohio, not far from the modern city of Newark, lies one of the most remarkable prehistoric earthwork complexes ever built in North America. At first glance, the area appears to be a series of large grassy fields bordered by long earthen walls. But when viewed from above, the true design becomes clear. The earthworks form an enormous geometric shape, perfectly measured, carefully aligned, and astonishing in scale. This ancient site is known as the Newark Octagon Earthworks, part of a much larger ceremonial complex constructed by the Hopewell culture nearly 2,000 years ago. The Hopewell people lived throughout the Ohio River Valley between about 100 BCE and 500 CE. Although they did not build large cities in the way later civilizations did, they created some of the most sophisticated ceremonial landscapes in ancient North America. The Newark earthworks were among their greatest achievements. Originally, the entire complex covered more than 4 square kilometers, consisting of several enormous geometric enclosures connected by long earthen walls. These shapes included circles, squares, and octagons built with remarkable precision across the landscape. The octagon earthworks are the most famous surviving part of this complex. The structure consists of a large, 8-sided enclosure connected to a circular earthwork by long parallel walls. Each side of the octagon measures hundreds of meters in length, and the entire enclosure spans more than 20 hectares. The walls themselves are made from carefully piled earth, rising several meters above the surrounding ground. Although they appear simple, their construction required enormous effort. Archaeologists estimate that the builders moved hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of soil using only wooden tools and baskets. Workers would have carried earth from nearby pits and gradually shaped the walls to create the precise geometric forms that still remain today. What makes the Newark Octagon particularly fascinating is its astronomical alignment. Modern research has shown that the layout of the octagon corresponds closely with the complex movement of the moon. Unlike the sun, which follows a predictable annual cycle, the moon moves through a longer cycle known as the lunar standstill, which repeats roughly every 18.6 years. During this cycle, the moon reaches its most extreme northern and southern rising positions on the horizon. The Newark Octagon appears to be aligned with these lunar positions. Certain gateways and walls within the structure correspond with the points where the moon rises or sets during these major lunar events. This suggests that the builders of the earthworks carefully studied the sky over many years before constructing the monument. Tracking such a long astronomical cycle would have required generations of observation. The site may have functioned as a place where these celestial movements were observed and celebrated through ceremonies and gatherings. For the Hopewell people, the sky likely held deep symbolic meaning. Many ancient cultures connected celestial events with spiritual beliefs and seasonal changes. The Newark earthworks may have served as a ceremonial landscape where communities gathered to observe these cosmic patterns. Large open areas inside the enclosures could have held hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of participants during important rituals. The site was not a fortified settlement. There is little evidence that people lived permanently within the earthworks. Instead, the complex appears to have been used primarily for ceremonial purposes. The Hopewell culture was also known for its extensive trade networks. Artifacts discovered at Hopewell sites include materials from distant regions across North America, copper from the Great Lakes, marine shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains. These discoveries show that the people who built the Newark earthworks were connected to a vast network of exchange and cultural interaction. Yet, despite their impressive achievements, the Hopewell culture eventually declined. By around 500 CE, many of the ceremonial earthwork sites across the Ohio Valley were gradually abandoned. The reasons for this change remain uncertain. Environmental shifts, changes in trade networks, or evolving social structures may all have played a role. Over time, forests and vegetation began covering the ancient walls. Centuries passed. European settlers eventually arrived in the region and began farming the land, sometimes unknowingly altering or destroying portions of the earthworks. yet parts of the Newark complex survived remarkably well. Modern archaeological research has revealed the astonishing accuracy of the builders' geometry and astronomical knowledge. Even without modern instruments, the Hopewell people created one of the most precise ancient observatories ever constructed in North America. Today, the Newark earthworks are recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, part of the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks Network that preserves these remarkable prehistoric landscapes. Visitors walking along the grassy embankments can still see the shape of the octagon stretching across the fields. From ground level, the walls appear gentle and quiet, but from above, the enormous geometric design becomes unmistakable. A monument built not from stone, but from earth, a structure that connects the landscape with the movements of the moon and the sky above. And a reminder that long before modern science, ancient societies were already observing the heavens and shaping the land to reflect their understanding of the universe. The Tarxian Temple Complex. On the island of Malta, in the heart of the Mediterranean Sea, lies one of the most extraordinary prehistoric monuments ever built in Europe. Hidden within the modern town of Tarxian, surrounded today by streets and houses, stand the remains of a temple complex that was constructed more than 5,000 years ago. This site is known as the Tarxian Temple Complex. At first glance, the ruins appear as a maze of massive stone blocks arranged into curved walls and chambers. But these stones were not placed randomly. They form a carefully designed structure that once served as one of the most important ceremonial centers of prehistoric Malta. The Tarxian temples date back to around 3150 BCE, during a time when the Maltese islands were home to a remarkable temple-building culture. These early farming communities constructed large stone monuments across Malta and the nearby island of Gozo, creating some of the oldest freestanding stone buildings in the world. The Tarxian complex represents the most advanced stage of this temple building tradition. Unlike many earlier temple sites, Tarxian consists of 4 interconnected temples built over several centuries. Each temple follows a similar architectural pattern, with curved walls forming a series of rounded chambers arranged around a central passage. This distinctive layout gives the structure a shape that resembles a clover leaf when viewed from above. The builders used large blocks of limestone, carefully shaped and positioned to form thick walls that have survived for thousands of years. Some of these stones weigh several tons, yet they were moved and placed without metal tools or wheeled vehicles. Instead, the builders relied on stone tools, wooden levers, and coordinated human effort. Inside the temples, archaeologists discovered something remarkable. Many of the stone surfaces are decorated with intricate carvings. These carvings include spirals, geometric patterns, and images of animals such as goats and pigs. The level of detail suggests that the temple walls were once carefully decorated as part of the ceremonial atmosphere of the site. Some stones also show evidence that they were once covered with red ochre, a pigment often used in prehistoric ritual contexts. This means the temples may have originally appeared far more colorful and vibrant than the bare stone ruins we see today. One of the most famous discoveries at Tarxian was a series of stone statues representing human figures. Fragments of these statues revealed detailed carvings of clothing, jewelry, and body shapes. One particularly well-known sculpture shows the lower half of a large figure wearing a pleated skirt. The upper part of the statue is missing, but the size of the remaining portion suggests that the full figure may have been more than 2 meters tall. Many archaeologists believe these statues may represent a fertility goddess or another important spiritual figure connected to life and agriculture. Religion likely played a central role in the society that built the Tarxian temples. The structures appear to have been used for ceremonies involving offerings and ritual activities. Evidence discovered at the site includes animal bones, pottery fragments, and stone altars. These findings suggest that ritual sacrifices may have taken place during certain ceremonies. The temples may have served as gathering places where communities came together for seasonal celebrations, religious events, and important social activities. the location of the complex within the surrounding landscape may also have held symbolic importance. Many prehistoric temples across Malta appear to be aligned with astronomical events such as the rising sun during particular times of the year. Although the exact alignments at Tarxien are still debated, the careful design of the entrances and chambers suggests that the builders were paying close attention to the movement of light within the structures. For the communities who built these temples, the relationship between earth, sky, and seasonal cycles may have been deeply connected to their spiritual beliefs. The construction of the Tarxian temple complex required enormous effort. Thousands of tons of stone had to be quarried, transported, and positioned with remarkable precision. This level of construction suggests that the society living on Malta during the Neolithic period was highly organized. Workers, builders, religious leaders, and community members likely collaborated to complete the monument over many generations. Yet despite the impressive achievements of this temple building culture, it eventually disappeared. Around 2500 BCE, the temple tradition of Malta came to an end. Many of the monumental sites across the islands, including Tarxien, were abandoned. The reasons for this sudden change remain uncertain. Some researchers believe environmental problems such as soil exhaustion or drought may have made farming more difficult. Others suggest that new groups arriving on the islands may have replaced the earlier population. Whatever the cause, the temples slowly fell silent. The roofs collapsed. Soil and debris gradually covered parts of the complex. For thousands of years, the site remained buried beneath layers of earth. It was not until 1914 that the Tarxian temples were rediscovered during construction work in the area. Excavations soon revealed the extraordinary ruins hidden beneath the ground. Archaeologists carefully uncovered the chambers, carvings, and artifacts that revealed the site's importance. Today, the Tarxian temple complex is recognized as part of the UNESCO World Heritage Group of Maltese megalithic temples, preserving one of the most significant prehistoric landscapes in the Mediterranean. Visitors walking through the site today can still see the massive limestone walls and the carved stones that once formed the heart of the temple complex. Although much of the original decoration has faded, the structure still conveys the scale and ambition of the people who built it. More than 5,000 years ago, these communities created a ceremonial space that reflected their beliefs, their skills, and their connection to the land. And even now, surrounded by the modern town that has grown around it, the Tarxian temples remain a powerful reminder of one of the earliest architectural traditions in human history. The hypogum of Hal Saflieni. Beneath the streets of the Maltese town of Paula, on the island of Malta in the Mediterranean Sea, lies one of the most unusual prehistoric monuments ever discovered. Unlike most ancient structures, this one is not built above the ground. It is carved directly into the rock beneath the earth. This underground complex is known as the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, and it is one of the most remarkable archaeological sites from the Neolithic world. The word hypogeum comes from Greek and simply means underground structure. But the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni is far more complex than a simple underground chamber. It is a vast subterranean network of halls, corridors, and rooms carved into solid limestone more than 5,000 years ago, around 3,300 BCE. This makes it older than many of the great monuments of the ancient world, even older than Stonehenge, and nearly as old as the earliest Egyptian pyramids. The hypogeum was discovered accidentally. In 1902, when construction workers digging foundations for new houses broke through the roof of an underground chamber. At first, the discovery was not fully understood, but as archaeologists began exploring the site, they realized that they had uncovered something extraordinary. An entire multi-level underground temple complex carved carefully into the bedrock beneath the town. The hypogeum consists of 3 main levels, each built during different phases of its long history. The upper level appears to be the oldest section. These chambers are somewhat irregular, suggesting they may have originally been natural caves that were later expanded by human hands. The builders gradually shaped the rock to create small rooms and corridors that formed the earliest stage of the complex. Over time, the site was expanded dramatically. The middle level became the most elaborate part of the structure. Here, the builders carved smooth walls, curved ceilings, and carefully shaped chambers that imitate the architecture of the above-ground temples found elsewhere on Malta. Some rooms even resemble the curved stone layouts of sites like the Tarxian temples. This suggests that the builders intentionally designed the underground space to reflect sacred structures already familiar in their culture. Perhaps the most famous chamber in the Hypogeum is known as the Oracle Room. This small chamber has remarkable acoustic properties. When a person speaks inside the room in a deep voice, the sound resonates through much of the underground complex. The vibrations can be felt and heard in distant chambers. Researchers believe this acoustic effect may have been used during ritual ceremonies. A voice speaking from within the oracle room would have echoed powerfully through the surrounding halls, creating an atmosphere that must have seemed mysterious and awe-inspiring. Another chamber, often called the Holy of Holies, sits at the heart of the middle level. Its entrance is carefully carved into the rock, forming a doorway that frames the chamber beyond. The precision of the carving suggests that the builders had both technical skill and a clear vision for the design of the space. The lowest level of the Hypogeum lies deeper beneath the surface. This area appears to have been used primarily for burial purposes. Archaeologists discovered the remains of more than 7,000 individuals within the complex. These burials were not arranged as individual graves. Instead, the Hypogeum appears to have served as a collective burial site, where generations of people from the surrounding community were placed within the underground chambers. Alongside the human remains, researchers found pottery, beads, stone tools, and small carved figurines. One of the most famous discoveries was a small statue known as the Sleeping Lady. This delicate sculpture depicts a reclining human figure lying peacefully on its side. The figure's body is rounded and relaxed, suggesting a state of sleep or rest. Some researchers believe the statue may represent a symbolic connection between sleep and death, reflecting ancient beliefs about the transition between life and the afterlife. The builders of the Hypogeum clearly possessed impressive engineering skills. Carving such a large underground structure required careful planning. The workers had to remove huge amounts of limestone using simple stone tools, shaping the chambers with remarkable precision. The complex also needed ventilation and structural stability to prevent collapse. Despite its age, much of the structure remains remarkably well preserved. This preservation is partly due to the stable environment underground. Unlike buildings exposed to weather, the Hypogeum was protected from wind, rain, and sunlight. Yet at some point around 2500 BCE, the site was abandoned. The same temple-building culture that created monuments like Gantija and Tarxian disappeared from the Maltese islands. Why this happened remains one of the great mysteries of prehistoric Malta. Environmental pressures, social changes, or outside influences may all have played a role. Over the centuries, the entrance to the Hypogeum became buried. The underground complex remained hidden beneath the ground for thousands of years. Only by accident was it rediscovered in the modern era. Today, the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most important prehistoric monuments in the world. Because the underground environment is delicate, only a limited number of visitors are allowed inside each day. Those who enter walk through the narrow corridors and chambers carved into the stone more than 5,000 years ago. The air is cool and still. The walls curve smoothly around the carved rooms. And deep beneath the surface of Malta, the ancient temple continues to preserve the memory of a society that built one of the most extraordinary underground monuments in human history, Noth. In the fertile valley of the River Boyne in eastern Ireland lies one of the most important prehistoric landscapes in Europe. Scattered across the valley are enormous ancient mounds built thousands of years ago by early farming communities. Among these monuments stands Noth, although it is often overshadowed by the famous site of Newgrange. Noth is actually one of the largest and most complex Neolithic monuments in Ireland. The site dates back to around 3200 BCE, placing it firmly within the same era as the Great Passage Tombs of the Boyne Valley. These monuments were built by communities who had already settled into agricultural life, cultivating crops and raising animals across the rich lands of Eastern Ireland. But these people also devoted enormous effort to building ceremonial structures that would outlast generations. Noath is one of the most impressive examples of that ambition. At the center of the site stands a massive circular mound measuring about 95 meters in diameter and rising more than 12 meters high. Surrounding the base of the mound is a ring of large curbstones, many of which are decorated with intricate carvings. These carvings are among the finest examples of megalithic art ever discovered in Europe. Spirals, zigzag patterns, circles, and abstract designs cover the surfaces of many stones, creating a visual language whose meaning remains partly mysterious. The central mound at Noath contains two long stone passages, one entering from the east and the other from the west. Both passages lead deep into the mound, ending in chambers where burials once took place. Unlike Newgrange, which is famous for its winter solstice alignment, the passages at Noath appear to be aligned with the sunrise and sunset during the equinoxes. This means that during the spring and autumn equinox, sunlight may have once illuminated parts of the chambers inside the mound. Although later modifications have altered the entrances, the alignment suggests that the builders of Noath were carefully observing the movement of the sun. For early farming societies, these seasonal markers were important. They helped determine the changing cycles of the year, planting, harvesting, and the gradual transition between seasons. The mound itself was constructed from layers of stone and earth. Archaeologists estimate that the structure contains tens of thousands of tons of material. Moving this much stone would have required the cooperation of large groups of workers. Without metal tools or wheeled transport, the builders relied on stone tools, wooden rollers, and coordinated labor to shape the monument. But the central mound is only part of the site. Scattered around the main structure are more than a dozen smaller satellite tombs, each forming its own smaller mound around the central monument. These smaller tombs likely served as burial sites for different groups within the community. Together they create a ceremonial complex that may have functioned as a sacred landscape for the surrounding region. The builders clearly placed great importance on the symbolic power of the site. The carvings on the stones are especially significant. In fact, Noath contains roughly 1/3 of all known megalithic art in Western Europe. Many of the decorated stones are located on the curbstones surrounding the mound, while others appear inside the passages themselves. The patterns are not random. Many appear to follow specific shapes and arrangements. Some researchers believe the designs may represent symbolic maps of the sky or cycles of time. Others suggest they may have had spiritual or ritual meanings connected to the beliefs of the Neolithic communities who built the monument. Although the exact meaning remains unknown, the complexity of the carving shows that artistic expression played an important role in the culture that created Noath. For centuries, the monument served as a burial and ceremonial site, but eventually the original Neolithic society that built it changed. By the Bronze Age, the passage tomb was no longer used in the same way. Later, cultures reused parts of the mound, building structures on top of it and leaving their own traces within the site. During the Iron Age, the mound may have been used as a fortified location or settlement. Centuries later, during the early medieval period, the mound was incorporated into the landscape of Irish kingdoms and occasionally mentioned in historical records. Despite these later changes, the core structure of the Neolithic monument remained largely intact. Modern archaeological excavations in the 20th century revealed the extraordinary complexity of the site. Researchers uncovered the decorated stones, mapped the passages, and studied the layers of history preserved within the mound. Today, Noath forms part of the Brú na Bóinne UNESCO World Heritage Site, alongside the nearby monuments of Newgrange and Doath. Together, these structures represent one of the most important prehistoric landscapes in the world. Visitors walking through the Boyne Valley can still see the massive mound rising from the surrounding fields. the carved stones remain in place around its base, and the passages still extend deep into the heart of the monument. Noth stands as a reminder of the extraordinary achievements of the Neolithic communities who once lived in this valley, a society capable of building monumental structures, creating complex art, and carefully observing the movements of the sun across the sky, all more than 5,000 years ago.